The attitude towards interstate borders and international travel is shifting. The second part of the exclusive YouGov News Corp poll shows majority of Australians want state borders opened and restrictions lifted once everyone has been offered a vaccine. And almost 70% of people support vaccine passports. Joining me now live is my colleague and Sky News host Peter Gleeson. Gleeson, it's interesting to look at this data. Take us through the most interesting bits as you see them.
Well, Laura, it seems to me the Australian public, there's this seismic shift. We've seen the lockdowns, we've seen the border closures, and now people are seeing the business chaos, families are being fractured. Now, this survey is a big one. I mean, when you think about surveys, having been a newspaper editor, when you're talking about 3,300 people, it's a big one. Only 8% of people want permanent border closures once everyone has had a chance to be fully vaccinated. And nearly two-thirds, they back border blocks against the unvaccinated. So, look, that's an interesting statistic. We're also talking about these vaccine passports, allowing people to travel interstate and internationally. Only 30% of Australians want the borders reopened for everyone to travel interstate, even without a vaccination, which I think is a really interesting point. These French-style vaccine passports, 2 out of 3 Australians believe that, COVID-19 immunisation should be required to access sporting venues, cinemas, museums, nightclubs and festivals. And young Australians are less keen on pandemic passports, with just 58% of the 18 to 34-year-olds wanting them, compared to 68% of those who are over 50. So support pretty high in Victoria and New South Wales, where, of course, residents have endured months of lockdowns. But it's an interesting survey. It's one that comes off the back of the Business Council and, captains of industry today coming out and saying we want certainty, we want clarity, we want confidence leading into Christmas. And I think it'll put a lot of pressure on states like WA, Victoria and Queensland to come on board and adopt those national cabinet protocols.
Yeah, absolutely. I spoke to Jennifer Westacott earlier in the program, and she says, that business largely support vaccine passports, but it shouldn't be up to business to police them either, which in reality makes it really difficult. I remember in New South Wales, there was some talk of hairdressers opening 2 weeks ago if you were vaccinated. So a vaccinated client could see a vaccinated hairdresser. It didn't end up happening. There was a lot of angst in the industry because hairdressers were worried that there was a backlash from, some of their customers who didn't want to see that happen, and they would have to essentially police it. So I don't know how you work around that, but it all comes down to leadership, doesn't it?
It does indeed. And I mean, Scott Morrison, the language has definitely sort of shifted. Even today, Daniel Andrews making murmurings about opening up parts of Victoria. And I think, the country has to accept that the eradication strategy that McGowan is so keen on, it's just not, that's fantasy land. If we get 70 to 80% of the adult population vaccinated, and it's done properly, people can still get back to work, we can still go ahead and go about our normal lives, but we can still be safe. And the Prime Minister today saying that it's a scary step. He's acknowledging it's scary to go down this path, but at the same time, he says we can't live in fear of this thing. We've got to live with it. And I think, some of the Labor states, some of the Labor premiers, Palaszczuk, McGowan and Andrews, have got to understand that that's the way forward. And unless we do that, we're going to just be the laughing stock of the world.
Well, surely Daniel Andrews is looking at these case numbers today in Victoria. 120 new COVID cases today, the highest it's been in a daily rate for the better part of a year for Victoria, and the highest certainly for this outbreak. He couldn't have locked down harder or faster. He had a curfew, playgrounds were closed.
Yep.
I mean, there was no movement in that city, and they cannot get back to zero COVID at this point, and he's seeing a steady rise in cases. Look, it's nowhere near New South Wales, but do you think that'll cause, Annastacia Palaszczuk, Mark McGowan to have some reflection? Because at the moment they're boasting about being zero COVID states. But once we're vaccinated, they're going to have to prepare the public for more COVID cases and deaths, aren't they?
Indeed. And, unfortunately, Palaszczuk and McGowan are going down this eradication strategy, this suppression strategy, which, the the rest of the world knows is just not possible, and it's fracturing families. We're seeing people unable to be reunited. Businesses on the border here, 30 kilometres from this studio, are going broke, Laura, because they're unable to access that northern New South Wales corridor. And I think, even Treasurer Cameron Dick today made the boast that, we're not going to go down the New South Wales path and let people into Queensland. But the reality is that if we want to get back to some semblance of normality, if we want to, have the nation back on its feet, so to speak, well, we have to take some risks. And these are the risks that are important. And leadership, you make the point about leadership, Laura, that is such a big issue now. Leadership is such a big issue in this country, and that's why the Prime Minister is really going down this path at the moment.
Well, look what's happening in Mundai. That's a border town. I mean, the town is split in two. The hospital's on one side, the population another, and still after pleas for a week, Annastacia Palaszczuk, to my knowledge, hasn't done anything to sort this out. Now, you broke the story indeed about NRL players being allowed in when Queensland is blocking its own citizens, cancer patients who have gone interstate for treatment and can't get back in. Now we've seen a tiny little backflip. Annastacia Palaszczuk now saying, 50 people will be given hotel quarantine spots last week. Now, it's not enough, but did that at least show, Gleeson, that she's feeling the heat just a bit?
Oh, look, the decision on Monday, she says it was made by the Chief Health Officer, Jeanette Young. It had to be ratified. I can't believe there were some apparatchiks and mandarins in the Palaszczuk government that allowed it to happen. Can we just take
a step back there as well? Because Queensland has a different, kind of set of rules, as every state does. And Annastacia Palaszczuk keeps on deferring to the Chief Medical Officer, who actually, under legislation, has all the power. But the government still has to tick off on it, surely.
Exactly. Well, exactly, Laura. You know how it works. The bureaucrats provide the advice, they provide the recommendations, and strong leaders will say, yeah, that's good, but no, that's not good. She just defers to the Chief Health Officer. Now, they campaigned to win the last election on their ability to keep Queenslanders safe, and Queenslanders bought that. So she gets, when it's a success story, Annastacia hosts that. When it's a bad story like Monday, that was the worst public policy decision I've seen in 40 years in Queensland politics. I mean, I've never seen a more bizarre, scandalous, stupid, dumb decision to allow, players' wives to come in while denying Queenslanders the opportunity to come back and reunite with their families. Today, she's copped so much heat over it, and today she's come out with a little bit of a concession. She had to change the narrative, but still. And look, I've written a column today in the Courier Mail. The Chief Health Officer made a very bad call on Monday. She's made some terrific calls during the course of this pandemic, but she's about to be... No, that's true. I mean, that was a poor call as well. But, in 2 months' time, she's going to be sworn in as the Governor of Queensland. She should go now. She should go now. She should go now.
Absolutely. Gleeson, good to talk to you.
See you, Laura.